What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Mike from Stansco here, and today's video we are going to break down basically the reason why you should either drift your first gen CTS-V or you should go out today and you should buy yourself a first gen CTS-V, buy our entire catalog of products and turn it into a drift car, because they're pretty good drift cars. So let's start. This is my 2005 Cadillac CTS-V. I picked this up about 2 years ago, and it was a bone stock car. From there, we went on to develop some products for it, and here we are. We have a drift car. We have a fully functioning drift car. Now, this car is LS6 powered. It's a 2005. And from 2004 to 2005, the first gen CTS-V had an LS6, which is a 5.7 liter engine. A 256 manual transmission was the only option. There was no automatic option, and it's rear wheel drive. From 2006 to 2007, which some of you have seen in previous videos, I have a 2006 CTS-V street car. They are LS2 powered, so that is a 6.0 liter, the same T56 transmission, and the rear wheel drive. So basically the only difference between the two is that you have a 5.7 liter and a 6.0 liter, and they both made the same power numbers at the end of the day. They both have the same cylinder heads, same power numbers. They just sound a little different. So one way or another, you go out, you buy a 2004 to 2007 CTS-V, which you can have some pretty nice ones for like the $10,000 mark. So we'll say 10 grand for a nice example of a car. Now this car, I picked it up, it had 237,000 miles on it. And the other day, I actually just rolled over 238,000 miles on it at the track. I literally finished a lap at the Englishtown, and I looked down and it was a dead even 238,000 miles. So it's a pretty good testament to the durability of these cars. After all, it is LS powered. So this car itself, while it may not necessarily look it, it has a very long wheelbase. It's 113.4 inches long. Now, I believe that is a little bit longer than the JZX 100, which I feel like when you put a JZX 100 next to these cars, it makes this car look a little smaller, because the JZX 100 has a lot more hanging off the front and the back. So this car has a little less body hanging off the edge, but the wheelbase is still there to give you that real long, stable feeling while you're drifting. Now, it does make it a little slower in things like transitioning and whatnot, but overall the wheelbase on this car definitely helps compared to some of the shorter wheelbase cars. Now, we can jump into the drivetrain in the engine bay here, and let's start front to back, the drivetrain, and what you can do to these things to make them drift better. So under the hood here, we have the original LS6. Now, in this particular application, all I did to it was get the heads decked, re-gasket the entire engine, and put a new oil pump in it, along with a big old choppy cam internally. Other than that, it's untouched. We just run some good oil in it and we let it eat. So with the LS6, you have your LS6 intake manifolds, arguably one of the best flowing LS intake manifolds before you get to the newer gen stuff. Feeding that, we have a stock air box, which I recommend you keep, and we have a Stansco carbon fiber intake right here, which I recommend you pick one of those up. Compared to the stock tube, these things flow a lot better, and they prevent heat soak and high intake air temperatures that like a K&N kit that just has a cone filter would give you. Cooling mods, we have a cold case aluminum radiator, and we have some Bono Specialties hoses, and we also have some track spec vents up here on the hood to just get the air flowing out. Now, these V8s, if you guys are looking into drifting, if you are a car enthusiast, you know that LSs are superior. So these things really just take it, and they take it well. One of the issues that CTS-Vs have is the power steering pumps though. So on my street car, just doing donuts, I managed to kill a power steering pump. These pumps don't like high RPM. The remedy for that we ended up doing was in this car was a brand new AC Delco pump, OEM pump, but then we did a 25% underdrive crank pulley. And what that does is it slows down the amount that this pump is spinning at high RPMs by 25%. And so far, knock on aluminum radiators, we have not killed a pump yet. We've had good luck with that. Also, a front mount cooler that's bigger than the factory one will help you with that. If you can keep the fluid cool and the RPM on the pump down, you'll have a much happier pump. Same goes for the alternator on these. So otherwise, engine bay, we just did regular maintenance on it. It is pretty much untouched other than, these couple bolt-on modifications. And it's right out of the box like that. So you don't have to LS swap a car to get this. It's all factory. We are even running all the factory harnesses and whatnot, and we still have AC in this car, which it's not charged right now. I just need to charge it, and then we'll have working AC in our drift car. So now let's talk transmissions. These CTS-Vs have a T56 transmission. It is specific to the CTS-V just because of it has a remote shifter linkage that's similar to the TR6060. It's kind of weird. These cars, like the back half of them, share some things with the newer TR6060s, and then they don't share things that you would think with like an F-body T56. But when it comes to the clutch on these cars, they come with a factory dual mass flywheel clutch. The easy solution to that'll hold up to your drifting is OEM LS7 clutch kit. LS7 flywheel, LS7 clutch kit, LS7 slave cylinder, and then you throw a remote bleeder on there, which we actually have one right here to get that clutch bled. And you have yourself a pretty reliable setup that just works. And then basically from there, you throw an LS7 clutch kit in the car and it's gonna do the job. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. These cars will just do it out of the box. All right, so the other thing with the rear differentials on these cars, a lot of people think that they're weak. Now they may be weak, but that is in a drag racing application where you're hooking up and you have traction from a dead stop. You run the risk of breaking the case of the differential open. When you're drifting with these cars, it's not really an issue because you are not wheel hopping when you're sideways and you're not gripped up in that sense where you're shocking the drivetrain like that and shocking the case of the differential. So there is a misconception that you can't drift these cars because the differentials are weak, and there's the misconception that if you do want to drift these cars, you have to do an entire second gen CTS-V rear subframe and differential. It's false. I drifted this car for 2 years with a factory differential that had 237,000 miles on it, and I just swapped a new one in because of I went to a different gear ratio. I went to a 391, but that 373 high mileage diff still comes with me as a spare. It's not an issue. So I just want to put it out there that a lot of people think weak differential, can't drift it, it's not going to hold up, you got to do all this stuff to it. You don't. Now, you do need to do bushings. So we'll get to the bushing stuff soon. So basically, drivetrain of this car is stout, and if everyone's putting this drivetrain into their drift car, why can't you just use the car they came in? So I just mentioned bushings, polyurethane, everything. There's companies out there like RevShift and Creative Steel that make poly engine mounts, trans mounts, diff bushings, and then all your suspension bushings. I highly recommend you replace at least the motor mounts because the factory ones suck. They're full of hydraulic fluid and they fail. Trans mount, it likes to tear apart. It has like this gap in it and it collapses. Both pretty cheap parts at the end of the day. And your diff bushing. Now, the factory diff bushing, CTS-Vs will have clunks and things like that. Your factory diff bushing is probably bad. So get a poly diff bushing in there and it'll hold that diff steady, prevent it from rocking around. On this car, I've done poly bushings in the rear upper control arms, the trailing arm bushing in the knuckle. I've done aftermarket trailing arms from BMR that has spherical joints on the inner mounting point. Up front, I have front lower control arm bushings and upper control arm bushings in the front as well from RevShift. And of course, I'm running the Stansco angle kit, which we'll get into the Stansco parts in a second here. So if you can tighten up the chassis via bushings, you're on the right path there. Next would be a good set of coilovers. Coilover options for these cars are increasing. I believe Feel Suspension makes them. Yellow Speed Racing makes coilovers for these cars. Megan Racing makes coilovers for these cars, but my personal favorites for this car are the BC Racing coilovers. I have the BC Racing DS series coilover. I had them custom spec'd to be a 14K spring in the front and a 12K spring in the rear. I think in the future I might try and drop my spring rate in the rear a little bit, but I love the way it feels on track. It's a DS series, so it's digressive damping on the strut, which I believe is kind of like it's bouncier on the street for like bumps and stuff like that, but when you're on track, the car just feels very smooth. I love it. Chelsea Denofa, I know, has done some videos comparing the two. So next, let's move to the interior. So surprisingly, when you move into the interior of the car, there are some options out there for things that you wouldn't think that you could get for a car like this. Starting off first with seat brackets. Pure Performance Texas, Evan Lewis, he makes fantastic seat brackets for these cars that fit in the factory configuration. They're a little funky compared to like other seat brackets. They don't use 4 bolts. The front has like slots, so his seat brackets really remove all the guesswork to mounting racing seats in these cars. I have Sparco seats in here, the Circuit 2 QRTs with the halos. We have a custom built Bell Raceworks cage, which, you know, no one's gonna pre-make a cage like that. Get something custom built to you with your seat that fits you and put your harnesses where they need to be and all that jazz. NRG makes an adapter hub to put on a quick release, and then we run a Grip Royal steering wheel in here. And then we have an ASD handbrake with a Stansco handbrake mounting plate. So you can get everything you need for the interior of these cars. We just have it trimmed up here. We trimmed up the factory door panels, kept our power windows. Bell Raceworks did a great job on this particular cage. And Pure Performance, Evan, he also makes, there's a little panel in there that relocates your buttons from your steering wheel to a little panel that you can still control your factory gauge cluster with, so you can go through the menus. So we got that mounted up there as well. I think we will be offering the Pure Performance Texas parts on our website at stansco.jp, so keep an eye out for that in the future. Evan's working on some really cool new things for the platform. In the rear, now some guys, they go for the 4-door cage so that it can be a drift taxi and all that. We went for function on this car. We went for 2 seats and a regular traditional style cage, but you have a lot of room in the back for when you go to the track. You can put stuff in the back. I've talked about potentially driving this car to the track when there's a new track that's going to be local to us opens up. You throw some wheels, my jack, go drift and drive home. Like, this car still has very good street manners other than the obnoxiously loud exhaust. So that brings us to my final touch point on this. Overall, we have a good rear-wheel drive LS-based car, but there's certain drifting parts out there that are necessary to drift well and to build a good car. And that's where Stansco steps in. That's where we were like, you know what? If I want to drift this car, I need to make these parts and make it available to everybody else so you guys can all join in on the fun. So the first part we ever made was actually the Stansco adjustable tow arms. Now you can't see them here, but it is a tow arm that replaces the factory tow arm. It has Heim joints on the outside. It has a center adjuster so you can make quick changes at the track, which I've done plenty of times, and it really comes in handy. And then the second part we made is the dual caliper bracket. Now, this is kind of a first of its kind here, and this dual caliper bracket allows you to mount a second Brembo caliper on the back of the car. So we have our factory caliper here, and then we have just another OEM one right here, and that allows us to have our hydraulic handbrake inside the car. Now, going off of this caliper, we offer the line kit that runs up into the trunk and all the way up to our hydraulic handbrake. Now, our handbrake is in there, and that in this particular car, we want an ASD handbrake. It's one of my favorite ones to run. They're always super tight when you pull them, and they just feel good. But in order to mount it in the car, you need the Stansco Hydro mount plate. So that mount plate goes around the shifter. It uses the factory plastic shifter surround and the mounting assembly, presses into it, centers it up nice. It goes right over the studs. And we left a lot of extra meat on there, so depending on your center console configuration, your seating configuration, you can trim it up, make it look nice. You have a good spot to mount your handbrake. So that's our whole entire handbrake assembly, and we have our tow arms right there. The front of the car, we are running our Stansco angle kit. Now, this angle kit will be released in September of 2024, in a few weeks from when we're recording this video now. And that angle kit will pair up with our extended brake line kit. Now, the extended brake line kit, what it does is when we were running cut knuckles, as soon as we put them on the car, when you go to full lock, the factory brake lines the rubber ones, getting tight. They weren't long enough to let the wheels spin how they needed to spin. So we have an extended brake line kit that gives you more length, so that way when you go to a higher angle situation, you don't have to worry about your brake lines pulling apart. And we have kits that go, they're just the soft lines on the outside, or we have kits that go from the ABS pump all the way out to the wheel. So it's a bunch of different brake line solutions for your CTS-V track cars. Then, in addition to the angle kit, we have a spherical lower ball joint that comes with the angle kit, and that's a really unique piece because it replaces that factory lower ball joint, so everything works in conjunction with one another. Some non-drifting parts, which I mentioned before, was our carbon fiber intake tube. It's a dry carbon tube, and it basically removes the restrictive stock pipe, but then allows you to keep your factory air box, which has been proven by many people in the past that on the V1 is the most power adding way to have cold air in your intake. The K&Ns or any other kit that has a cone filter, our engine bays get so heat soaked that it's just, it doesn't work. Somebody actually lost power when they went to a K&N, and then they picked up, I think it was 12 horsepower back in the day, by just going to a K&N panel with the stock box and a 3.5-inch tube. So our carbon fiber tubes are awesome. They don't heat soak as fast as aluminum or steel or anything like that, so good option. But we are coming out with plenty of more things as time goes on. We're constantly trying to develop this chassis and support this chassis, and it's really been our main focus to really get this car dialed in. So before we wrap this up, we're going to talk about suspension. Now, these cars have a double wishbone front suspension, which could get a little weird sometimes just because of like the strut top style and thing that they offer, but ultimately it's a double wishbone suspension. There are some upper control arm options that we have available on our site right now, but we are going to be dabbling into adjustable lower control arms that we can pair with our angle kits to give you more clearance and whatnot. The steering rack is mounted on the front side, which we did some things in our angle kit to basically help make it better. Can't disclose all of that right now, but you'll see. And then the rear suspension is a trailing arm setup. Now, I did mention that we have BMR suspension trailing arms to replace the factory ones. The factory ones have rubber bushings in them that have crazy amount of deflection, so the BMR ones have a spherical joint that really tightens it up. Now, with a trailing arm car, it's kind of similar to, I want to say it's kind of similar to a BMW, sort of. You can get a lot of mechanical grip out of a trailing arm car. So you throw a little bit of toe in on these cars and it can turn into a rocket ship, which I've done before, and it's kind of crazy. Even on like a party tire, throw like a 1/4 inch of toe in and the car feels so much faster. So that's a pretty neat aspect of it. Now, all in all, at the end of the day, do I think you should go out and buy a CTS-V and drift it? Of course. Do I think you should then go to www.scansco.gp and buy all the drifting parts that we have? Also, of course. So these are good, capable cars. I think right now they are probably the cheapest LS powered stick shift car that you can get your hands on that can perform in a drifting scenario rather simply. Camaros, catfish Camaros and things like that, like 4th gen cars, they, you still have like solid rear axles and things like that, and like really dated technology and whatnot that I think they take a lot of work to make work. These cars, you get a good set of coilovers and you do a couple things to tighten up the chassis and they do pretty darn well. I've drifted this car from near stock to building my way up to where it is now, and I mean it didn't do too bad. It's a good party car, and there's a lot of guys out there that are jamming on them with cut knuckles or stock angle and just a good set of coilovers and things like that. So these cars do have a lot of potential, and I'm hoping that as time goes on and other cars start getting more expensive and things like that, the cost of entry to these cars right now is pretty low, and you can find some higher mileage options for like the $7,000 to $8,000 mark. So I definitely recommend checking them out. Watch my videos, I have so much information out there on these cars, and I definitely think at the end of the day, you should drift your first gen CTS-V. Not because I'm biased or anything, or that I make parts for them, but I truly think that this car does well. A friend of mine drove mine last weekend for a lap, and he was surprised. He said it actually, the way I have mine set up, he said it kind of feels like a Nest chassis. It kind of like floats in corners, and the steering feels nice. It's smooth, but it's like a slower transitioning car because of the wheelbase, things like that. And you have the torque of a V8, the instant response of a V8. So I have plenty of videos on my channel that you guys can find more information on. If you're interested, check it out. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And like I said enough times already in this video, www.stansco.jp, and check out our part offerings. We are constantly adding things and building out our catalog, and hopefully we're going to be offering some more parts from other people in the platform, because I feel like right now this platform is really going in the right direction and picking up, and I love to see it. So thank you guys for watching this video. I hope it informed some of you, and it seems like it's gonna thunderstorm here in a few minutes. So we're gonna wrap it up. Hit subscribe, follow me on Instagram at Mike_Stansco, and I'll see you guys in the next video.